Alright, we've got the correct bridge height set based upon the capo being at the first fret. Let's go ahead and take the capo off now. And now what we're going to be concerned with is that same measurement, which is the top of the fret to the bottom of the string. And what we're going to do is make sure that we have about a .02 gap between the top of the fret and the bottom of the string. And you're going to have to check each one of these, because whereas the bridge has a pre-curved radius, each nut slot has a different depth, so therefore it's going to have a slightly different curve to it. This is one of those pre-slotted nuts, so it's not going to be set exactly. So you just take your measurements from the bottom of the string to the top of the fret, make sure you have a .020 gap. If you don't, for example, on this first E string, we've got about a .039040, which is almost double what we really need. So I'll show you how to adjust that using our new nut slot files that we just made. Alright, so let's take these measurements, make sure that they're around .020. If you don't have those measurements, if they're too high, you know you're going to need to lower the nut slot. If they're too deep, you may have a little problem, but we'll cover that in a later section. So we've got a .048 string, so what we're going to be looking for is .049 or .050 gauge depth. And here we go. Okay, so we've gone ahead and cut our small notches in the edge of this file. Now if you notice the headstock break angle, the nut is where it starts sloping down at. So the fingerboard's straight this way, the nut's this way. The slot should mirror this angle here, which is the headstock coming off of the nut surface. Okay, so what you want to do is start very slightly with gentle strokes, mirroring this angle here. If you're sloppy with your nut strokes or your files, you may want to go ahead and put some masking tape over the top here just to protect the headstock surface. But take a few whacks with it, put your string back in, tune it up, and check the height again. You want to work slowly, carefully, and conservatively when you're doing this, because once you cut it too deep, it's too deep. Then you move on to the next string. Okay? Check each one of them carefully and make sure that the distance from the bottom of each string to the top of that first fret is a uniform distance. If each of those measurements from the top of the fret to the bottom of the string is equal, the radius of your nut is going to match the radius of your fingerboard, and it's going to match the radius of your bridge. That's what you want to do. Okay. We have gotten each one of these nut slots cut to the correct depth based upon the measurement from the top of the first fret to the bottom of the string as it comes off of the nut. Once you've got all 6 of those measurements exact for each string, what you'll find is that the radius of your nut slots mirror the radius of the fingerboard, and that's what you want, which is a consistent, even action. Okay? One of the last things you want to try and do after you've used your homemade files or your expensive nut files is that you'll find, if you looked under a microscope, there'd be some rough edges in the bottom of this slot. That's just from the file tools as they chatter through the bone or plastic material. Okay? So if you really want to do a professional job, I believe strongly in this stuff. It's called Mitchell's abrasive cord. It comes in different diameters, and what it is a string that's impregnated with abrasive. So you can actually remove the string from the nut slot and then run this cord real lightly through the nut slot file that you just made. What it does is it polishes and smooths the bottom of the nut slot so that the windings of the strings don't catch on any inerrant marks that are left on the bottom of the nut slot. It makes for a really nice smooth nut slot file, and your string won't bind up, and it'll actually tune very easy without any hang-ups or any binding. Last thing you want to check for a properly cut nut, you'll find that each string is sitting roughly slightly more than halfway in its slot. In other words, the top of the string is protruding slightly above the top of the nut surface. Okay? What you don't want is a string that's buried down into the nut file slot itself. That ends up being a dead sounding string with little weird overtones and buzzing. So what you may have to do is remove all 6 strings after you've cut the nut slots and actually file and round over the top of the nut slot so that it exposes about half of each string as it sits in its slot. This will give you the best action. If you're a heavy player or play real heavy-handed, you may want to leave a little bit more than halfway in there. But you still want a lot of strings sticking up above that nut slot surface, just because it frees up the vibrational plane of the string even better. On this particular example, we've got the nut slot cut at the right height, and the top of the nut is also set at the right height, so there's really a lot of adjusting to do on that. Once you've got this all set up, you want to tune her up, check how she plays, check for any buzzing strings up and down the fretboard, check your intonation, and you should have a pretty good playing guitar at that point. Well, that's the basic outline of the procedures you need to set up a guitar properly. However, there's hundreds of minute variables involved in this, and the important thing is to listen to your hands and what the feedback from the guitar is telling you. If you hear buzzing strings, or if the action's too high and difficult to play, you know you haven't done something right. But as long as you have the string measurements from the bottom of each string coming off the nut to the top of the first fret at a comfortable equidistance, and you have the bridge height set so that the bottom of each string from the top of the last fret, that distance is uniform as well, and then they both mirror each other. The neck's fairly straight with a tiny bit of relief or just a tiny little bit of bow in it, and your intonation set properly, your guitar is going to maximize its potential. And that's the whole point of all this. Three things: work carefully and conservatively, okay? Want to make sure that you don't take off too much material off your nut. Cut very slowly, measure, file a few strokes, measure, file a few strokes until you get the right thing. Make sure, double check your measurements at all times, because these are small incremental hundredths of an inch measurements. You want to make sure they're right. And then final thing is play the guitar in a variety of styles. If you play hard rock and you play heavy, or if you're a country picker or anything in between, finger style, whatever. You just want to make sure that the guitar responds to the style and the method of playing that you personally interact with. And that should get you well on your way to having a lot better sounding instrument. My name's Will Kelly, and you've been at the Hard Knocks Guitar Shop.